At just 5 years old, young X Musk was a remarkably responsible child who never wandered off without permission. So, when he vanished from his secure home on a quiet Saturday morning, carrying only a dinosaur-shaped backpack, panic erupted immediately. Security footage captured him walking purposefully through the garden gate, but then he disappeared completely. As helicopters searched the skies and volunteers combed the nearby woods, one haunting question grips everyone: how could a 5-year-old simply vanish in broad daylight? When X is finally found, the circumstances of his discovery and what he was doing will challenge everything a rational mind believes about coincidences, dreams, and the unexplainable. Little X Musk, at the tender age of 5, was unusually dependable for his years. Even at such a young age, he stuck to a simple routine, stayed close to his caregivers, and understood the basic safety rules that came with being part of a high-profile family. His father had taught him essential lessons about staying safe and being aware of his surroundings, lessons X absorbed with the kind of seriousness some children reserve for the most important instructions. He was the sort of child who tidied up his toys after playtime without being asked, who said, "please," and "thank you," unprompted, and who knew certain places were off-limits and some rules were non-negotiable. X had a gentle nature and a keen sense of observation, often noticing when adults seemed tired or when pets needed attention, which made his sudden disappearance on a peaceful Saturday morning all the more alarming. The day began like any other in the Musk household, a comfortable home with a spacious yard that offered both privacy and a safe space for a young child to play. Mornings followed a familiar, pleasant pattern: a shared breakfast, some playtime, and the promise of outdoor activities later in the day. That Saturday, X sat down to breakfast with his father, chatting about wanting to help feed the birds in the garden later. It was the kind of innocent conversation parents cherish, a child's enthusiasm for simple joys and his eagerness to care for the creatures around him. X had always shown a special empathy for animals and a genuine interest in helping with household tasks, even if his efforts sometimes caused more mess than help. "Dad, can we put out extra seeds today?" X asked, carefully spreading jam on his toast. "I think the birds might be really hungry." "Of course we can," his father replied, watching as X focused on keeping the jam from dripping. "Once I finish looking over these papers, we'll go together and make sure all our bird friends are well fed." X nodded gravely, as if they were discussing a serious matter, not just feeding birds, a trait typical of him, approaching even small tasks with sincere care and attention. After breakfast, X settled in the living room with his favorite building blocks while his father, Elon, retreated to his home office to review some documents. The office door stayed open, allowing Elon to hear X playing nearby, the soft clatter of blocks and X's quiet chatter as he constructed elaborate structures drifted through the house. Elon was absorbed in technical reports when Mrs. Chen, X's longtime nanny, knocked on the door, her voice tinged with worry. Mrs. Chen, a dependable woman in her 50s, had cared for the Musk children for years. She wasn't one to panic without cause, so her expression immediately caught Elon's attention. "Mr. Musk, I can't find X anywhere," she said. 20 minutes ago, he was playing with his blocks in the living room, but now he's gone. I've checked every room, every closet, even under all the beds. He's just not here." Her words hit Elon like a physical blow. X never wandered off. He didn't leave designated areas without permission. He was a child who understood boundaries and respected them. The shift from a routine morning to a full-blown emergency was sudden and terrifying. What followed was every parent's nightmare, a situation that turns ordinary days into sleepless nights and haunting memories. Elon immediately abandoned his work and joined Mrs. Chen in a more thorough search of the house. They called X's name, checked every possible hiding spot, and scoured rooms they'd already searched twice. The meticulous sweep of the house and grounds revealed nothing. The once familiar space now felt vast and full of potential hiding places, though they'd looked everywhere. The home, usually a safe haven, suddenly seemed different, potentially dangerous rather than secure and welcoming. Security cameras provided the first clue about what had happened. Footage showed X walking through the garden gate at 10:15 a.m. He moved with the determined stride of a 5-year-old on a mission, carrying his small dinosaur backpack, the one he used for special outings, and appearing calm, not upset. His posture suggested purpose, not fear or confusion. After that, he vanished from all surveillance, slipping into the world beyond the family's carefully guarded property. Seeing his son walk away so deliberately brought both relief and dread. X hadn't been taken against his will, but he was still a 5-year-old alone in the world, a thought that gripped Elon with fear. Within hours, a discreet but intense search operation began. Private security teams, local police, and child welfare specialists worked around the clock, following every lead while maintaining confidentiality to avoid media speculation. The coordination was impressive and thorough, involving dozens of trained professionals who understood both the urgency of the situation and the need for discretion. Elon canceled all his meetings and remained on constant alert, his usual composure cracking under the weight of parental fear. A man who could make million-dollar decisions in seconds found himself paralyzed by the unknowns of his son's disappearance. Where was X? Was he safe? Was he scared? These questions looped endlessly in his mind. The search stretched through the day, growing more extensive with each passing hour. Neighbors were quietly questioned, had their own children seen X, or had he mentioned wanting to visit any special places? Nearby parks were thoroughly inspected by teams trained to spot signs of a small child's presence. Traffic cameras for miles around were reviewed, their footage examined frame by frame for any glimpse of a little boy with a dinosaur backpack. Each hour without answers heightened the collective anxiety. The neighborhood, typically quiet and serene, now buzzed with the subtle activity of ongoing searches. Police cars patrolled slowly, searchers combed wooded areas, and helicopters occasionally appeared overhead. How could a 5-year-old vanish in broad daylight from a safe area? As night fell, the search grew more urgent. The thought of X spending the night alone somewhere was unbearable for everyone involved. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging scanned the area, their powerful cameras searching for the heat signature of a small body. Volunteer search parties scoured nearby forests, calling X's name and listening for any response. Amber Alert protocols were activated, with X's photo and description sent to law enforcement across the region. Elon barely slept, sitting by the phone and repeatedly watching the security footage, searching for any clue they might have missed. He studied the image of X walking through the garden gate over and over, trying to glean something from his son's body language that might hint at where he was going or how he was feeling. Mrs. Chen stayed at the house, unable to rest while X was missing. The night dragged on, filled with phone calls from search coordinators, updates from various teams, and the dreadful waiting that accompanies any child disappearance crisis. Every sound could be X coming home. Every phone call might bring good news, or devastating news. 24 hours after X's disappearance, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A call came into the police hotline at 10 a.m. on Sunday, exactly one day after X had walked through the garden gate with his dinosaur backpack. Mrs. Eleanor Martinez, an elderly woman living 6 blocks away, called with information that initially seemed unbelievable. Her voice was hesitant but clear, the tone of someone unsure if they should call but feeling compelled to do so. "I think the boy you're looking for has been in my garden," she said. "He's been helping me with my vegetables since yesterday morning. A sweet child, very polite, says his name is X and that he's helping someone who needs it." The officer taking the call was momentarily speechless. A 5-year-old couldn't possibly travel 6 blocks alone, find a stranger's house, and stay there unnoticed for 24 hours. Yet Mrs. Martinez's voice rang with sincerity, and her description matched X perfectly. When authorities arrived at Mrs. Martinez's modest home, they found 5-year-old X sitting peacefully on her back porch, carefully watering tomato plants with a small watering can. The scene was so calm and domestic it felt surreal after the intense search of the previous day and night. X looked up, surprised, as he saw the police and his frantic father approaching. His expression was more curious than frightened, as if he couldn't understand why so many adults had suddenly appeared in his quiet workspace. "Hi, Dad," X said cheerfully, as if his absence were perfectly normal. "I was helping Mrs. Martinez. Her garden needs a lot of water, and she can't reach the low plants because her back hurts. The casualness of his greeting was both heartbreaking and infuriating. To X, this was just another day, another chance to help someone in need. He had no idea of the fear and searches his disappearance had triggered. Mrs. Martinez, a 78-year-old widow, stood nearby, looking equally confused about why so many people had descended on her yard. She was a petite woman with silver hair neatly pinned into a bun, dressed in a house dress and a gardening apron. Her yard was modest but well tended, with raised vegetable beds and a small porch with a swing. "He showed up yesterday morning," she explained to the gathered adults. "Knocked on my back gate and asked if I needed help. I thought maybe his family had recently moved into the area, but he seemed to know exactly what he was doing." As Elon embraced his son with relief, feeling the solid reality of X's small body and breathing in the familiar scent of his hair, questions began to surface. The relief of knowing X was safe was overwhelming, but it was quickly followed by confusion about how this had happened. How did X know to come here? How had he found this particular house? Mrs. Martinez lived on a quiet street, far from any route X would typically travel. He had never been to this area, never met Mrs. Martinez, and couldn't have known she needed help with her garden. She looked sad, X explained simply when asked. "I saw her trying to water her plants, but she kept having to stop and rest, and when she bent down, her back hurt, so I came to help." The explanation was delivered with the straightforward logic 5-year-olds use to describe their actions. To X, the sequence of events made perfect sense. He saw someone who needed help, and he helped. The complexity that adults grappled with was invisible to him, but his explanation raised even more questions. When asked when and where he had seen Mrs. Martinez struggling with her garden work, X's response was bewildering and didn't align with reality. "In my dream," he said matter-of-factly. "She was in my dream, and she needed help, so I came to help her." The adults exchanged glances, their faces reflecting confusion and disbelief. Dreams don't provide specific addresses or show real people who genuinely need assistance. Dreams don't guide 5-year-olds through unfamiliar neighborhoods to find particular homes. Yet somehow, X had done exactly that. Somehow, he had found his way to a stranger's house and spent 24 hours helping with the very tasks she struggled to do alone. The precision of the match between Mrs. Martinez's needs and X's actions was astonishing. Mrs. Martinez provided more details about X's arrival and the time they spent together. X had appeared at her back gate around 10:30 a.m. the previous day, politely introducing himself and asking if she needed help with her garden. The timing aligned perfectly with when he disappeared from his home's security cameras. "He was so polite," Mrs. Martinez said, her eyes softening with affection. "He knocked gently on the gate and said, 'Excuse me, ma'am, do you need help?' When I told him I was having trouble with my garden, he asked if he could help. Assuming he lived nearby and that his parents knew where he was, she gratefully accepted his assistance. In her generation and neighborhood, it wasn't unusual for children to help elderly neighbors, and X's polite manners and evident knowledge of gardening reassured her it was a normal occurrence. "He worked like a little angel," she said, her voice full of warmth and amazement. "He watered plants I couldn't reach, pulled weeds, even helped me pick vegetables for dinner. When it got late, I offered to call his parents, but he said they knew where he was and that it was okay. He slept on my porch swing, I gave him a blanket and a pillow." The image of X sleeping peacefully on a stranger's porch swing, wrapped in blankets provided by a kind elderly woman, was both touching and terrifying. What if Mrs. Martinez hadn't been trustworthy? What if she hadn't cared for him properly? The possibilities were too frightening to dwell on. To X, the situation seemed entirely unremarkable. To him, he had simply helped someone who needed it, as he'd been taught. The lessons of kindness and helping others that his father had instilled in him were put into practice exactly as intended, even if the execution was far more adventurous than anyone had anticipated. Further conversation with Mrs. Martinez revealed more touching details about her circumstances and why X's help meant so much. She had been struggling with her garden for weeks, unable to maintain it due to arthritis and a recent back injury that made bending and lifting difficult. "My doctor told me I need to be careful with my back," she explained, unconsciously rubbing her lower back. "But this garden is all I have left of my husband. He planted it 40 years ago when we moved here, and we worked in it together every day until he passed 5 years ago." Too proud to ask neighbors for help and too financially constrained to hire assistance, she had watched the garden slowly decline despite her efforts, her heart aching as the plants her husband had lovingly tended began to wither from neglect. "I prayed for help," she admitted quietly. "My late husband planted this garden 40 years ago, and I couldn't bear to let it die, but I didn't have the strength to care for it alone anymore." Somehow, X had provided exactly the help she needed, arriving at the right moment with the right skills and attitude. His small hands were perfect for reaching into tight spaces between plants, his boundless energy suited tasks that exhausted Mrs. Martinez, and his genuine interest in gardening made him an eager helper rather than a reluctant one. As authorities wrapped up their investigation and the family prepared to head home, Mrs. Martinez pulled Elon aside for a private word. Her eyes shone with grateful tears, and her voice trembled slightly with emotion. "Your son has a special heart," she told him, placing a weathered hand on his arm. "However he found me, I'm so thankful. He saved my garden and reminded this old woman that there's still kindness in the world." X's disappearance remained technically unexplained. Security experts couldn't find a logical reason for how a 5-year-old traveled several blocks to a stranger's house, stayed there undetected for 24 hours, and provided help that perfectly matched the need. The investigators, seasoned professionals who had handled many missing child cases, found X's situation didn't fit their usual categories. He wasn't abducted, lost, or a runaway in the typical sense. He had somehow identified a need and responded with a precision that seemed impossible for his age. In the days that followed, the incident became a topic of conversation in the neighborhood, though Elon requested minimal media attention to protect the privacy of both X and Mrs. Martinez. The story was too unusual and heartwarming to remain entirely private, but Elon was determined to keep it from becoming a spectacle. Conversations with neighbors revealed that X's disappearance had sparked an unexpected positive outcome. Several neighbors had quietly noticed Mrs. Martinez's struggles but hadn't known how to offer help without seeming intrusive or presumptuous. "I saw her working in the garden," one neighbor admitted, "but I didn't want to offend her by suggesting she needed help. She's always been so independent. I noticed she wasn't keeping up with the yard like she used to," another said, "but I wasn't sure how to bring it up." X's actions inspired a network of support. Different families began taking turns helping with her garden, grocery shopping, and home maintenance. What had been an invisible struggle became a community effort, and Mrs. Martinez graciously accepted the help now offered in the spirit of continuing what X had started. For X, the experience felt entirely natural. When asked why he hadn't told anyone where he was going, he explained with the logic of a 5-year-old that made perfect sense to him, even if it alarmed the adults. "You don't ask permission to help people. You just help them." The simplicity of the statement was both beautiful and concerning. Elon wanted his son to keep his instinct to help others, but he also needed X to understand the safety issues tied to disappearing without notice. Elon felt both frustrated and proud. The parental fear of the past 24 hours would likely never fully fade, but he couldn't help admiring his son's compassion and determination to assist someone in need. He implemented new safety measures to prevent future disappearances, including more detailed talks about the importance of telling an adult his plans, and began exploring structured ways for X to channel his desire to help, volunteer opportunities suitable for a young child, always under proper supervision, allowing X to experience the joy of helping without the risks of solo adventures. The incident also led to regular visits between X and Mrs. Martinez. Every Saturday morning, under careful supervision, X spent an hour helping in her garden, forging an unlikely but genuine friendship despite their 73-year age gap. These visits became a highlight of their weeks. Mrs. Martinez prepared for X's arrival, planning tasks suited for small hands and boundless energy. X arrived with his little gardening tools and an enthusiasm that never seemed to wane. He asks such thoughtful questions, Mrs. Martinez told Elon one Saturday. He wants to know why we plant certain plants together, how long it takes for seeds to grow, what keeps plants healthy. He's learning, but he's also teaching me to see my garden with fresh eyes. Mrs. Martinez often told visitors that X had come into her life as an answer to her prayers, while X simply saw her as a friend who needed help with her vegetables. Neither saw anything mysterious in their connection, it was just the natural result of one person recognizing another's need and responding with kindness. Their friendship was mutually enriching. Mrs. Martinez began looking forward to Saturday mornings with renewed energy, planning garden projects she and X could tackle together. Over time, X learned about different plants, the season cycles, and the satisfaction of nurturing living things. She knows so much about gardens, X told his father one evening. She taught me that some plants like to be friends with other plants, some need more water, and some are stronger when they're together. For those watching this story unfold, it served as a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful adventures aren't about going somewhere exciting, but about finding someone who needs what you can offer. The neighborhood itself changed because of X's adventure. The support network formed around Mrs. Martinez continued, with neighbors checking on elderly residents and offering help where needed. X's example showed that helping others doesn't require grand gestures or perfect planning, sometimes it's enough to notice and care. While the mystery of how X found Mrs. Martinez was never fully solved, what grew from their meeting mattered most, a friendship that enriched their lives and reminded everyone around them that help often comes from the most unexpected places. 6 months later, Mrs. Martinez's garden was thriving more than it had in years. With X's regular help and contributions from other neighbors, she could maintain the beds her husband had planted, even adding new sections that reflected her current needs and interests. The garden became a symbol of community support and the power of simple kindness. X continued his Saturday visits, their bond deepening with the changing seasons and the garden's natural cycles. He learned about planting and harvesting, the patience needed to care for plants, and the joy of working alongside someone who valued his efforts. Mrs. Martinez often reflected on how drastically her life had changed since that Saturday morning when a little boy knocked on her garden gate. Her prayers for help had been answered in a way she couldn't have imagined, bringing not just practical assistance but a renewed sense of purpose and connection to her community. The story of X and Mrs. Martinez became a quiet legend in their neighborhood, passed along as an example of what can happen when people, no matter their age, notice others' needs and respond with generosity. It stood as a reminder that sometimes the deepest adventures begin not with a clear destination, but with a heart open to helping where it's needed. This concludes our narrative journey. I trust you found this gripping saga of intrigue, cutting-edge innovation, and astonishing discoveries captivating. From where are you tuning in today? I'm curious to learn which corner of the globe this tale has touched. If this escapade held your interest, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for a steady stream of compelling, mind-expanding stories just like this one. Fresh material is posted frequently, ensuring you're always in the loop for the newest spellbinding adventures. Be sure to pass this video along to your loved ones and friends. It's a great way to share positivity and insight while expanding our circle of story enthusiasts. Your encouragement is invaluable. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to welcoming you back for the next tale.